Hello guys, you're welcome once again. In the last tutorial we initialized a Spring Boot project on the Spring Starter website where we add all the necessary dependencies we want and we downloaded the project. In this section we'll go ahead and open a Spring Boot project and implement every of the functionality, and we'll see how we can leverage the Spring security to protect our app, protect some of the routes, and also authenticate and authorize user to access some routes. In case you missed that part of the section, you can do well to check that on the previous video tutorial, which link will be on the description below. This is my IntelliJ IDE right here. I'll go ahead and click on File, and then I want to open the project which we initialized from the Spring Starter website, and I call the project security, which is what we have here, and you can go ahead and open that. I want to trust this project, and I want to open it on this window on my IntelliJ IDE. Click on OK, and so this is the project right here, and this is our pom.xml file where you get to see every of your dependencies and every of the packages you want to work with in this very project. You have it right in here. So the first thing I need to work on this time around is to add my database configuration file. I will want to create a file here. I want to work with the XML for my application configuration variable. So I'll call that application.yml. Okay, and within the application.yml file, I want to grab my database configuration setting and then just put it there, and so this is a YML file. This is my my database configuration variable. I'm using my SQL just like we have it there on the dependency. So I added my MySQL driver, and then so these are the credentials to my database. Sorry for that. And I want to use this to create I'm connecting as a root user and the password, and these are my JPA setup. And while I have that, I can just go right ahead, and this is the main entry file to your Spring Boot project, and click on the start button right here, and that will run our Spring Boot application immediately. So I can go ahead and enable the notification. I think this port, I need to change this port because I think I'm running my container on that port. So let me give it port 401, and then restart my application once again. You can see right here it's saying the port is already in use. So I have to run this application once again with this new port of 4301. So currently the application is trying to build up, and once that is completed, then we'll see the project being launched and there on our terminal. So currently our application is successfully started. Everything is working all good, and if you go to your browser on localhost ports 4301, which is what I'll try to do right now, that is where application is currently running at. So localhost, and the port is 4301, and once I hit on enter, then by default, this is Spring Security now at work. We need to log in with our credential before we can even get access to the app. So Spring Security is protecting every of the routes which we have within our project, and the default user login detail for your Spring Security is user, and then the password will be printed whenever you launch application on the terminal. And if you see right here on my screen, this is the default password which you can use to log in. So at the launch of your web application, every time this password gets generated, and so let's try to use that to log in our web application and see what we have. And once I log in this time around, then I get redirected to this white error login page because I currently don't have any routes that can be displayed whenever the user log in. That's why I'm getting this white error. But at this time around, we provided the right login details, and we're able to log in into our Spring Boot application. So we will be making our own configuration because the user, we don't want the user to log in with a password which has been printed on the terminal, which is kind of very long and very unimaginable for any user to remember that. We want the user to log in with their own registered username and password. So that is we'll be configuring that into our system. And then for some route, especially the home route, we don't want to force the user to enter some login details. So that is what we'll basically be doing. So for that, let me stop my project from running and let's create some packages. So the first package I want to have is the config package where I'll configure my Spring Security, and then within this Spring Security, just like I have here on my board, we'll be having this web security config class, and within that we'll have two being the authentication provider and the configure. So let me create the class right now, and let's create a Java class, and we'll call it Spring Web Config, any name you want to give it, but I would love to go with this name. So within my Spring Web Config class, this class will make this a configuration. We'll add a configuration annotation, so Spring Boot will work with that, and then we need to enable web security. I'll bring by with the enable web security annotation that will work with this as a configuration file for the Spring Security, and we need to extend the web security adapter. This is this one we have right here, and deprecated. In the next tutorial, I'll show you how to work with the updated version of that. And then here we need to auto-wire our user detail service interface, and we'll bring that in private user detail service. I want to call that as user detail service, and we need to auto-wire this let me just put in the auto-wired annotation, and we have that. Then the next thing is we need to create the two methods which I made mention of here, and that is what I will be doing next. I will have the annotation authentication provider, and I'll call the name can give it unto authentication provider as well. This method is not taking in any variable, so I will just want to have a DAO authentication provider here, and we can call it provider, and then this is will equal new DAO authentication provider. Now we need to set our provider. We need to set what we want to use for our security provider. So we'll have the sets. We want to set the user detail service, and that is our user detail service which we created right here. And then we need to also set the provider password, provider.set password. So we want to use bcrypt, so I'll have new. We want to use bcrypt encoder. That will be what we want to use to that's what we want to set our provider. Then we just need to finally return our provider this time around. And so that is all for the authentication provider method. We need to put the admin annotation here at bin. So Spring Boot will pick that and work with it as a Spring bin. And then the other one we need to have, the other method we need to have is the configure method. So we can have that as a protected method, and have a protected void. Can call it config, and then here we'll have this is taking in the HTTP security, and then that is, you can call it HTTP security, and then that will have a basic configuration here on the on all of the methods we need, on all of the routes we need to allow, and what are some of the required credentials the user need to provide for them to log in. So here we just need to have HTTP security. We need to call the authorize request. We need to call the authorize request method, and then from there we'll begin to have anti-matchers. Have the anti-matchers. So on this anti-matchers method, this is where we'll pass in some couple of routes and some route pattern and what we want to allow on those route patterns. So I have for the slash, so whenever there's, so the slash is like a default home route, and then if there's any HTTP if there's any HTTP method coming here, if there's any HTTP method of gets, so this is like it gets to the default home route, it gets HTTP request, and let's convert this to string. Then if there's any method of this pattern, we just want to permit all, because this is there like our default home route, and whenever the user is coming to the home route, we don't want to request, we don't want to always ask them for password or username whenever they want to hit that route. We want to expose this route so the user can get to see whatsoever we have on the platform, and then from there we can navigate them to the route where they need to put in their password and the rest. Okay, so that's for the default home route, and then I also want to have, I just need to duplicate this route. I can do a command D if you're on IntelliJ IDEA just like me right here. Let me collapse this right here so we can have some space and you can see the code snippet. Now whenever the user is coming to this route also of register, let me give that as register. Any route that's coming to /register, this is the route where we want the user to put in their credentials, their username, password, and all of that, and they will be sending some post requests here. So I'll make that to post. So whenever the user is hitting this route, I also want to permit all, and that is for the registration route. And then I also want to duplicate that. I want to, whenever the user tries to go to a home route, and so for the home route, I don't care what method that is coming with, any method that is coming to the home route, or let me call that user, let me call this as a user route. So this is just standing in like a user dashboard page or whatever route you want to have. Then I don't want to permit all this time around. I want to say it must have some authority. The user need to have some authority to access this route, and then the authority this user need to have, that will be from, we'll get this authority from our role. So this user need to have a role of user before they can access this route of user. And then I also want to copy that and then just paste that for the admin. Whenever anybody wants to access the admin route, and they must have the role of an admin before they can access this route. So this so basically we'll just be working on just this 4 routes. You can add as many routes, as many rows you want on your config setting, and you give all of the settings there, and you can explore all of the other method or security check you want to have on your HTTP method. And then after that, any request that is coming outside, I need to have a dot there. Any request that is coming outside of the permitted ones right here, I want to make sure that they are authenticated, and we need to have the end method once again. We need to implement this on the HTTP basics, and also we need to, since we'll be receiving some body from the user registration form and login form, we'll be receiving some post requests. Then we need to also disable the CSRF protection. So if you don't, or you can add some more security setting on that, and how you can manage the CSRF protection policy. So I will need to enable, I want to disable the CSRF. I want to have that disabled as well, and So that is basically all we need to have for configuration. And here I need to import, we need to add an exception to our HTTP configuration file. We need to throw exception should in case there's some kind of error, then the exception will get that handled for us. So that is all we need to have for our web config class. And the next thing we need to work on is to create our user security service that will implement user security class that will implement the user details service. So this class, that is where we'll be setting that's where we'll be providing what method we want to use in our user security detail right here that we're passing into our authentication provider. So for that, let me create a package quickly right here. I want to have a new package. I will call this service, and within this service package we want to have a new Java class of can call it user security service. So just like I said, the user security service class will implement the interface for user detail service. This will implement user uppercase user detail service. And now this user detail service is an interface, and the interface have a method of load user by username. That's why we're having this error warning red underline right here. So if you hold your Alt and Enter key, you get to see this intelligence coming up asking you to implement the method. You go ahead and implement that, and we want to load our user interface right here. So at this very point, this is where we need to get the user based on the email and the password provided from our database, and then we'll check if the user email and if the user password, if it's correct, if it exists, then we can go ahead and allow the user, and we can go ahead and authorize the user to access the web application. So this is where we're doing the authentication and the authorization. So for us to do that, we need to create a repository, our repository where we'll make some requests into our database, find the user based on the email and the password provided, and if the user provide us the correct necessary details, security detail, then we can go ahead and allow them access. So for that, we need to create a file. Let me have a package first. We want to have a new package. I'll call this repository package, and within our repository package, we need to want to have it's an interface time around. So I want to call this user repository C3 interface. So I'll call this user repository. We can just go ahead and call it user repository and not an interface, and that will be fine. And then this will implement the user the JPA. This repository, this user repository will extend the JPA Spring Boot class that provide us some of those SQL functionality that we will use to make we don't need to write all of those raw SQL queries. So we'll have the extends JPA repository, and we have to make sure we import that from the Spring JPA repository class. Okay, while that is imported, we can go right ahead and so we need to add a method here that will get us the user by email, because by default the Spring JPA repository does not provide us such functionalities. So the Spring provides us to save a user, get a user by primary key or get a user by ID, and so for us to get the user by email, we need to add that method right in here. And for that, for the Spring JPA, for our user repository class, we need to tell Spring what our user entity looks like, and then what's our primary key. So for that, before we have that set up, we need to create an entity package and a file. So we can go ahead and create a Java file. I'll call this entity I'll call it user entity. So within our user entity, this is where we'll have the basic field which we'll be having on our database table. I'll have the entity flag right there because it's for our database tables, rows, and columns. So I'll have private long. I'll have this ID, and then we'll need to have private string email, and let me duplicate that. We'll have private full name for our user, and then we can have private for role for the user, and then we also need to have password for the user, so they will need that whenever they want to log in. So password we have, and then we need to have the at ID annotation. So JPA will take this as our ID, and then we need to tell JPA how this will be generated. We're not going to be passing this, so we want JPA to auto generate it, to generate that. So have at generated value. So we're telling JPA this will be a generated value, and then we need to give the strategy. This will be of generation type. This will be automatic, and we'll need to have some getters and setters for that. And so for that, we can bring in a Lombok package dependency here to get us that, to avoid unnecessary template code. So we'll just bring in the data, and then we'll need the no constructor, and then we also need the all constructor. So this is basically all we need for our user entity class. So then we need to pass this also into our user repository. So JPA will work alongside that, and then we'll pass that in as generic. So this is user entity, and then we also need to pass in ID type, which is of long. So here then we'll add the method for getting a user by user ID, and that's that will return us a type of user entity, and I want to call the name of the function find by email rather. That would be how a method will look like. And this function, this method will take in a string, will pass in the string of the ID of the email rather that we want to find the user with. So that's all we need to have within our class, and this is the extra method we will need on our JPA. Every other ones basically is already inbuilt in the JPA repository class by default. So that is that, and we can go back right now and set up our user security service. So here we need to right now bring in the repository, the user repository interface we created, because we have a method there that we want to implement, and that will that we need, that will help us get the user by email, and then from there we'll check if the provided detail is correct, and then if the user exists and all the information provided, if it's true, then we can go right ahead and allow the user, authenticate the user for on the app. So we need to bring in the let me make that private of user repository. I call it user repository still, and we can have this at autowire. So that is that, and now we want to return this user to user details service. So for that we need to get the user first thing first, and this will have user entity that the user want to get. We can call it current user. This is equal user repository dot find by email. We're getting this email right there because we have that added in our repository interface. So we need to pass in the username here. So now we're not working with username. The user is not logging in with username. That's why so the user will have to pass in our email, and we are using the email as the username for the user to log in, and that also works fine. And if you want to work with the email, this is just like what the user need to pass in for us to for us to load the user and then validate and authenticate the user. If they exist, then we can go ahead and permit them, else then we can go ahead and return that. Let's put in an if statement here of if there's no current user, if this user does not exist, if the information provided does not exist, this will return null. So if this is null, okay, and then just go ahead and throw the exception, and so this username exception here, we can work with that, and then just pass in the string message that want to throw to on as our response. So we just want to throw username. We just want to throw new username not found exception. This is what we'll have here, and here we'll put in the message of user not found message. So we'll have that in there. But what if the user exists? There we want to return the user. Now remember, this is an interface, so we cannot we need to create a class that will implement that, and so we can have an object of the class then. So that will lead us to the third the final class, which I made mention of here, of get user details. So this will be this class implement the user details interface, and that provides us all of this mention of getting username, gets user password, gets user authority, and all of that. So within our same service class, and lest we forget this our user security service, we also need to annotate that with the @service annotation. So Spring will also know how to handle that and work with that for us. Then lastly, let's create the custom user detail. I'll call this custom user detail class, and then this class will basically have to implement the this class will implement the user details interface, just like I said. So for that we need to have some space there. This should implement the user details. Okay, now this have some couple of methods that this interface have some couple of methods that we need to have in our class, and then we'll go ahead and override those methods. We need to go and implement them here now. So just like I had it here on my slide on my board, these are the basic security feature we'll be working with. Now Spring would have some couple of security features. We just need to accept those and make them true, because in this very basic tutorial demo we're not going to be discussing majorly on that. We just want to get the username, email, and then the password and the role, so we can authenticate them and permit them to some kind of feature they want to have on our app. So if you want me to discuss on more of the security feature and credential, you can put that on the comment section below. So for that, is the user enable, we'll just by default make that to be true. Is the credentials not expired? We want to say it's true. Is the account not blocked? I want to have that true based on the feature we have on our database. So we don't want to make this to be true. And we also want to check is the account expired? Is the account not expired? Also want to say true, that's the account is not expired. And for this, we can go ahead and bring in a user entity, so we can have a class of that private. We'll call this user entity, and we can go ahead and call this user, and we are just bringing in an object of the user we want to get. And so for that we can get the user password, get the username, because whenever this class is being called, then we need to pass in whenever this class is being called, we'll have the constructor of the all our constructor, and then from there this the getters and the setters and all of that will be there within, and we'll have we need to create a constructor of this class the all our constructor. This is the only private variable we'll have. So whenever they're having that, and then they need, whenever this class is being used, then we need to the constructor will be passed, and this user will also be passed alongside the class, and then from there we'll pick that. So we don't need to manually have the constructor. We'll get that from our long box. We'll have the all ads constructor, and let's just bring in the no ads constructor, which is not necessary though. And then we need to also make this a component, a Spring component. And so we need to get the username, the password, and the authority. So for the username, we just get that from user dot get email. We're working with the email. We don't have a username on our database. If you have a username, you can work with username. If you want to implement the user, if you want to allow the user to log in with the username, then you can go ahead and work with that. Or if you want to go with the with the email, then any way you wish to go with, and that is fine. So for the password, we need to return user dot get password. So now for the authority, for the get authority, we just want to return, this is a collection, so we just want to return the collections. We want to have the collections. This is from the Java 80 class. We want to have a singleton of let's have a new singleton authority, and here we just want to get the user dot get so get role for that. So that will return us the user role, because we are having just single role of user and admin on a database. We're not having a separate database, or we're not having some separate functions for our rows. If you have some separate function or more rows, and you have a class for you to implement that, then you need to write the functionality for that, so that way you can get the role and then return that for the user. So since our role is just very basic, the user will be sending in that. We'll be assigning the role to the user at the point of registration. We can just have it as very simple as this. So at this point, we have every of our details set up, every of our Spring security, every of our classes, and everything we need to implement is all set up. Lastly, what we need to do right now is to have our Spring route and HTTP endpoint and method. So for that, I'll create a package. We'll call that a configuration, a controller package, I mean. So we have a controller package, and here within a controller package, we can go right ahead and have a user controller class. Okay, now this is a controller class, so we need to give it the Spring. This is a controller class, so we need to give it the REST controller Spring annotation. So we have to put it. This is a REST controller, and we can have some request mapping for our controller. Have some request mapping, so any of this is unnecessary because we don't need that. I don't want to make this very basic and straightforward. So the first thing we need to do is we need to have some method of to register user, and then a route to take the user to home page, which will have the /user, just like we have here in our custom web security config. And then these are the routes we need to create for our controllers endpoint. For us to finally to do that, we need to have some service, because we don't want to have all of our endpoints are communicating to our database here directly on the control file. We can have that in our user service class. So for that, let me just go ahead and create a service file, a service Java class file here. I'll call this user service, and then we need to add the @service annotation to this @service annotation. Now here we need to bring in a repository. JPA will be doing that most of the query for us I bring in a repository and I call this user repository. I can have this auto wired, so have the service auto wired, and if we don't want to we can, because this is actually a Spring this is the repository we created, and this is we have that as an auto wired. We have that as a repository which is extending the JPA class, and Spring is handling that interface for us. So I need to have a constructor right here, and if I so since whenever I'm creating an instance of this class, that will get called, so I don't necessarily need to have the auto-wired variable. For that, I can just I need to call that within my constructor. I'll have this user repository. So whenever this is being called, we need to bring in the user repository, and I'll call this as user repository still, and then here I want to be sure that this dot user repository equal that which is being auto-wired, and within our class. So I have that this is user service, not user repository. That was a typo for me there. Okay, so whenever I'm trying to register a user, I will want to encrypt the password. So for that, I need to have the password encoder package. Also, I can have that from a Spring Framework password encoder, and I'll call this password encoder. Also, I want to get that. Now I want to set that here also within a constructor. So this is a password encoder equal new. I want to use the bcrypt password encoder, new bcrypt password encoder. So that's basically it for my constructor right there. I basically need just two functions here. A function to just basically one function, which is what I need, which is to register a user into our database, because they need to register and then log in with their provided login credentials. So I'll have a method that will return me a user entity. I'll call this register user. This is the name of my method, and this will receive a payload which will be coming from a controller request body. I'll call this payload is of the start payload. So all I need to do here, I need to save the user into the database. But before saving the user into the database, I want to first hash the password. So let me just get the password first. I'll have that string as hashed password, and then that would be this the password encoder. I'll call the encode method on the password encoder functions, and then I'll pass in the password which we'll get from our payload dot get password, and that will encode, that will get the password from the payload being sent, encode it, and the next thing I need to do, I need to use the setter method to update a password from the plain password we have now and put in the encoded string there. So say payload dot set. I want to set the password to the hash password which we just hashed right there, and at this point our password is hashed already. Lastly, we don't need to return. I want to return our user repository. I'll use the .save method that Hibernate JPA provides us, and this time around I'm just passing the payload. So that's basically it, and that's all what we need for our user service class. Now back to our user controller class. This is where we'll have the method which will specify right here in our Spring security. We need to have the home route, the register route, the user, and the admin route. So we need to create that route on our Spring user controller class. So for the home route, I'll have the get mapping of whenever a user tries to get this slash, then we want to give them this public string. I'll call this a home, so we don't need to receive anything this time around. I just want to return welcome to the server. So that's basically all we want to have for the home route, and anybody can visit here, and this can be like kind of a dashboard route, or a landing page route, or any default route you want to allow the user to access. So the next thing is I need to create the registration route, which is also not protected. So that will be we need to make it a post mapping, and then the route is of having this register endpoint, and that for this route we need to create the class public, and so this route will return kind of a user entity. I'll call this register, and then for this we need to get a user entity from the user, and we can call that payload, and then we'll have a body. Now this user entity payload, we are getting it from the form body, so for that we need to add the we can call it request. We can bring in the request body. That's where we're getting this payload from, and for that we need to return all we need to do is to return we need to bring in our user service here at AutoWired. I'm gonna bring in our user service class. We can call this a user service. This is the class communicating to our databases, where we have all of database class, and all of the class manipulator and database. We have it right in here within our user service. So we just want to return the user service dot register user, and we need to send the payload to this. And so that is basically all we need to do to register our user. And lastly, let's just create a default route for the user home. We also want to make that a get mapping, and the route for that is /user, and we want to just return a string of method returning a string. I'll call it user route, and then this is also not taking in anything, so we just want to return a simple string message of welcome to user route, and that is all what we need to do for the test. And then I also need to bring in another route. Let me just duplicate this. I want to bring in another route of the admin route this time around. So be of /admin, and let me edit this to admin as well. Admin route, I'll call this welcome to admin route. So that's basically all we need to do. We have our security configuration set up with the Spring Security. We have a user service in place. We have user security, where we're loading a user. We're using the load user by username method that is coming from our user details service interface, and we also have some of the basic routes which we have here. We have the home route, we have our repository, and everything in place. So right now we'll just go ahead and start this service, and we test our Spring Boot application. So the video we'll be posting it here in the next video section. We'll just go ahead and test this endpoint and see how our Spring Security works. So thank you for sticking around. See you in the next and the last phase of testing our web application with Spring Security.